Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho.
Gas taxes may go up 2 cents. Millions of dollars from the federal stimulus package are pouring in, and it's all going to pay for Idaho's roads and bridges. But is it the best way to fund transportation? And just how bad are Idaho roads? Join the conversation. Dialogue is next. Hello, I'm Joan Cartan-Hansen. Thank you for joining us here on Idaho Public Television, on the World Wide Web, and on public radio stations. Combining federal dollars, gas tax revenues, and registration fees in the next fiscal year, and assuming the legislature approves it, the Idaho Department of Transportation will have more than $688 million to spend on Idaho's roads and bridges. There's an additional proposed $82 million available in Garvey bonds. And with all that, Governor Butch Otter says it's still not enough. He wants an additional ongoing $105 million, which would come from increased gas taxes and higher registration fees. Now, the House is considering a 2-cent gas tax increase, far less than what the governor proposes. So how much do we really need for Idaho's roads and bridges? And is the best way to pay for them? A recent legislative audit found that the Department of Transportation's current funding method can't keep up with growth and maintenance. So what are our options? Joining me tonight to discuss this subject are three guests. House Transportation Chair Representative Joanne Witt. Representative, thank you for being here.
Thank you for asking me.
Also joining us is Pamela Lowe, Idaho Department of Transportation Director. Pamela, thank you for appreciating it.
Thank you.
And also joining us is Dave Carlson, Director and Public Affairs and Government, Public and Government Affairs. I'll get that out there. I'm sorry, Dave. For AAA Idaho. Dave, thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And of course, we want to hear from you. Join the conversation. Give us a call, toll free at 1-800-973-9800. I guess the first question to start is just how bad are Idaho's roads? There's some dispute.
Yes, I'd love to begin to tackle that. I do. You know, right now, 20% of our pavement across the state is considered deficient. That means it's cracked or it's rough. And we're projecting that next year, we're going to be at 24% deficient. So we're increasing exponentially. And then in the next 5 years, we're projecting if we don't have any new revenue based on just what we have the money for, what's in our 5-year construction program right now, we're going to be at 36% deficient pavement. And these cores I have sitting in front of me, they kind of show you what the problem is. Now, these both come from District 2 out of Lewiston. This core shows you what a road should look like. Nice and tight, it's cohesive, the asphalt is solid all the way down. This is from a new roadway. This is what it's supposed to look like. This one, what you can't see on the top here, is there's a little crack. This is not the kind of crack you see driving down the road at 55 miles an hour. But what you can see is all the deterioration. This crack lets water down into the surface. The asphalt has come unbonded from the aggregate beneath it, and this whole thing is in the process of rubbleizing. We will lose this roadway. This is what a deficient roadway looks like. This is what we're heading to, with almost 40% of our roads being in this kind of shape in the next 4 years. You can't fix this kind of a roadway now with just a chip seal or a little overlay. You're going to have to go back in, and you're going to have to completely rebuild this whole road. So that's why we've really been trying to emphasize the need for maintenance on our road system now. If you can catch this kind of stuff while it's in good shape, you can spend $1 versus having to spend $6 2 years from now trying to fix this kind of a situation.
Now, there's some dispute over exactly those figures depending on who you talk to, but regardless, I think everyone agrees that there's a real crisis in the terms of the amount of money that we need to put in to maintain our roads. I think that you wouldn't disagree with that.
No, and we were part of the Forum on Transportation Investments. The number that came out of that group about three years ago was $200 million plus in needs per year, $20 billion annualized for the next 20 years. So there were some big numbers there. The numbers may be less than that now, I think, with the new audit, the new studies, and some of the different looks. I think it's fair to say that we're looking at annualized cost in the range of maybe $130 to $140 million each year that we need.
Is that 130 or 40 more than we're getting?
Additional dollars, and I think that may be one of the things that a lot of Idahoans are missing in the discussion. They think we're talking about a $200 million stimulus money, for instance, that would solve the problems. What we're really looking at are 130 to 140 million minimum per year for the next 20 years, just to get us up to speed.
Right, so then we come to you. We
Yes.
go to our legislature to fix this problem.
They are looking at us too, and we have really looked at that and studied it very carefully. We don't agree with the 240 figure. We are very supportive of the audit that was done, and the audit did tell us that we were 134 behind in one particular area, and that was the maintenance and preservation of our roads, as Ms. Lowe has talked about with the with this particular keeping this kind of a road in good condition. We're very far behind on that. The audit did tell us that we were probably spending more than we ought to be on new, and that was creating a problem. And so the legislature, looking at that, we were having difficulty really knowing where we needed to be and what the really cost was, what we needed to do, and we did go looking with the audit. And we did spend $450,000 for an audit, which I thought was very well done. The audit did tell us quite a few things that they thought we could do better, to use our money better. And I will say the department has picked that up very quickly. And I think that audit helped the department, it helped the governor.
Oh, absolutely.
It helped us as a committee, for us all to more or less get on the same page with the realization that yes, we need more money for roads. How much is that? We're not really sure yet. We did appropriate some money for the new technology for the department, so that the things that were given to them as an idea to help them do better in the audit, they are adopting that as quickly as they can, and we did give them $9 million to begin on that.
Okay. Well, I've got full phone, so let's go to our first caller, David in Boise. David.
Hello.
Go ahead.
I want to know who sets the substandard for highway construction in this state. And my reference is the highway between Caldwell and Ontario. About every year, they've got to rebuild a third of that road. And there's just the construction methods in this state are really, really bad.
Okay.
Can someone please answer that?
You know, I'm not going to talk about the specifics of a roadway, except that I will tell you from a statewide perspective, when you're talking about the interstate system, which I'm sure we would be from Caldwell to Ontario, that was built in the 60s. 1960s was when we built the interstate. Those roadways have exceeded their design life. That is absolutely what we're talking about when we talk about our system is deteriorating, and it has lasted much longer already than what we anticipated when we first built that. And when we set our standards, we work very closely with the Federal Highway Administration, and our standards are very similar to exactly what's built in other states. I mean, it is, we are not doing completely our own thing here in Idaho. So we are very committed to building quality roadways, but the problem is the system is so old, we're having a heck of a time just keeping it together.
Okay. Let's ask Wayne in Boise. Wayne.
Yes.
Go ahead, Wayne.
Yes, my question is similar to the one that's just been asked, is why do we look at a transition between Idaho roads into Oregon, into Utah, into Montana, into Washington, and we have a discrete difference in the quality of the roads? Idaho roads are not the quality the adjacent states are. Why is it this discrepancy occurs?
Okay.
Well, a lot of that comes down to just funding. When you look around at states across the nation, Idaho has basically two primary funding sources. We're heavily reliant on federal funds. When it comes to the state, it's fuel tax and registration fees. When you start looking at other states, like Montana, Oregon, Wyoming, they're all using supplemental pieces of sources to get revenue in for transportation and roads. Idaho is one of the few states in the nation that rely on the two sources of state revenue that we do.
And I think there's a big thing wrong with that, Joan, is in some years past it was determined when the budgets were made that the new cars and used cars, that the sale of those and the sales tax for that went into the general fund. And also for auto parts and tires and batteries, those sorts of things, the money for that, the sales tax on that goes into the general fund. And it really should have always gone to transportation. And it's $187 million.
So 187 is what you projected.
$187 million we looked at last year. I think it's more than that because we didn't have the big box stores figured into that, and the governor has told us that he will have the tax commission take a look at that and find out what the figure really is. Now the problem with that is because of the economy being so bad and things going down pretty rapidly in Idaho as well as around the nation, we are not in a position to go into that general fund at the present time. Had we been able to have that right along, we probably wouldn't be in the position we're in now. But I don't think we need to give up on the idea that we should go and have that contribution from the general fund somewhere along the way. Other states are doing that and using some of the sales tax. So I think in the future we can't depend on fuel tax. We're getting more fuel efficient cars, and people, when it gets high, the fuel tax gets high, the price, people don't buy as much. We have to go, I think, a way that's not a real solid thing we can plan on as for a funding source in the future.
Joan, I would agree with what Joanne's saying. And I guess another way to frame the issue is to say that we've had underinvestment. Now, whether that was by design or by choice or whether it was we simply overlooked it, we don't have the same kind of money that other states have to spend. So we were a little bit miffed, I guess, at some of the comparisons that we've had with surrounding states, and that demonstrate that Idaho's registration fees are lower than they are in other places. Actually, they're pretty much on par, but some of these other states have taxes like ad valorem taxes. And Joanne's right. I think if we had some other options, I think we wouldn't be in the place we're at.
Well, that is one of the problems with going around and comparing other states, saying, well, here's how Idaho stacks up in registration, here's how we stack up on fuel taxes, because other sources of other states are using much more sources to fund transportation, so it's hard to compare just one source against another.
Okay, well, let's take another call. Let's see, Bob in Boise. Bob?
Hello.
Go ahead, Bob.
This is Bob. I have a couple of questions. One is, why don't you look at starting an adequate transportation system of buses, like from Coeur d'Alene to Boise and up to Idaho Falls? People could travel the complete state on a bus system. It would take a lot of cars off of the road, especially a lot of the state cars who drive from Coeur d'Alene to Boise with one person in them, or from Idaho Falls to Boise with one person in them.
Well, Bob, let's bring up the question of public transit. Public transit has really gotten the short shrift.
But they've got a lot of stimulus money this year. The Compass, I think, I believe the figure is $11 million.
$11.5 million.
$11.5 million of stimulus money for that, plus.
But it's one-time money, and they need an ongoing source of funding.
And there is an ongoing source in the MPO, the money that comes to the metropolitan planning organizations as well. And the original idea for that, to help the larger cities, was to help transit. And so they do get a federal dollars that come right into the MPOs. I don't know if they're using it for that. That's one of the things we didn't get into in our audit, was to look at how that was being used as well as locals. And so there is, we had a bill go through the legislature this year that I voted for, which was a local option tax for specific transportation projects. It didn't make it through the House. The House of Representatives is very concerned with what is happening in the economy and what's happening with the people that they represent. And they're getting this feedback from the people that they represent. Don't raise our taxes. We're losing our jobs. We're getting our pay cut. We're losing our homes. We just don't want you to raise our taxes. And that's the message that people in the House of Representatives have been getting from their people at home.
What do you think is going to happen with your 2-cent increase?
I think it's questionable whether, if they stay with the way the trend has been going, everything we brought up has been voted down, and the same thing they say all the time: this is not the time for us to be raising taxes. We can't cut people on one side and then raise taxes on the other. And that's the debate that you're hearing in the House every time we bring any one of the different funding sources up. And I don't know that that's going to change too much. I really have no idea how that's going to play out.
Do you think that this is an issue the governor has really staked his legacy on? He wants to do something about Idaho roads.
I know he wants to, and all of us want to. And I don't know whether he's getting I think a lot of the people that have been talking to him are people who are going to make money or do well if we have contracts out there, or if we have projects for to stimulate jobs and that sort of thing. And I'm sure he's hearing from those people, but we're hearing from people that are not very well off and that are struggling at home, and so to try to balance the two, the legislature's kind of in the middle.
Yeah. If I could go back to just the public
Sure.
transportation thing, one, just to allow ITD to say, you know, we are responsible for all modes of transportation. And we want to take a leadership role, and we are working to maximize all modes of transportation. We work very closely with people providing bus services, et cetera. We've got a responsibility for that. But what we were talking about and are talking about in terms of transportation infrastructure is maintaining the existing road system. We're not talking about buying anything new. We're just talking about taking care of what's built out there right now, and buses need that infrastructure to run on too. So this is not a bus exclusionary proposal.
All right, let's go.
And the other issue is, obviously, if you put people into transit situations, you've removed the funding source that got them there in the first place.
Right.
And that's the group I represent. Motorists are the guys, the men and women, boys and girls that are paying for this, Joan, and it's a tough issue when you look at it from that standpoint.
Okay, let's go to, I think, Van in Boise is next. Van?
Hello, good evening.
Good evening.
I'm going to bring up a subject that's just wrought with politics, I'm sure. But until we get the truckers to pay for the damage they are doing on our highways, we'll never get in front of this curve. You can run 100 cars over a mile of highway and not do the damage you do with, or 1,000 million cars over a mile of highway and not to do the damage you do with 1,000 trucks.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. There has been some criticism that the fee structure is unfair, that truckers are not paying their fair share.
Yeah, in fact, that's been the basis of everything we've been saying for the last 10 years, and it begins to sound like a broken record. But when we've looked at what we have right now based on 2 or 3 or 5 studies, very strong evidence suggests that the heaviest trucks on the road are not paying their fair share. And yet all of the solutions that we're looking at, either in gas tax or higher registration fees for cars, seem to go to the low end for motorists. Yeah, we've got a real issue with that. We call it an equity issue, and it's something that we've been studying for the last number of years.
And I have a different point of view on that. And the reason I have that different point of view is because I did sit in 8 excruciating sessions of trying to find a formula for registrations, and we now have those heavier vehicles at $4,000 to register a vehicle in the state of Idaho. And you know, we have $48 for a car, and we have $4,000 for a truck. So how many more miles? I mean, you know, we don't know if that's equitable or not. We have said we need to really look at the spread of different kinds of vehicles and the cost to each of them. The increase on the registration would have been on all vehicles, and some thought that it wasn't equal because it was 5% on the, but 5% of $4,000 is a lot as compared to 5% maybe on a lower $48 or $36 or $24, which is what we have cars at this present time.
And my take on it is nobody's paying their fair share right now.
Okay, let's.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And we had never come to the point, AAA, saying that motorists shouldn't pay more. But when we saw what we thought were disproportionate increases, a 5% increase for the biggest trucks, as the gentleman calls in, mentions doing the most damage, and we saw increases on registered car registrations as high as 175%. Now some of those numbers have come down. It looks like the governor's trying to buy the public on or sell the public on that issue. But clearly, a cost allocation study that your organization did 2 years ago showed that trucks, the heaviest trucks on the road, were underpaying their fair share. Another study that looked at 22 states that have cost allocation studies showed that in 19 of those states, heavy trucks were underpaying. So we think there's plenty of evidence to make our point.
And then a cost allocation study we did previous to that said that the heavy trucks were paying their fair share.
And those cost allocation studies are really tricky. And I was saying I never finalized that one that we did 2 years ago because we ran into some data problems. We are going to do a new one this year, and we want to involve both of you in any groups that you think that we should be talking to.
Well, as I told you before we went on the air, no one hurts the host. Let's get to our next caller, Charlie in Riggins. Charlie.
Yeah. If you guys have drove up 55 from Boise to McCall, you see all the road signs have been knocked over by the snow plows. You know, that happens wintertime, it's going to happen. Well, here in a little bit, the weather breaks, the DOT is going to be out there, and they'll be putting them signs back up. Only problem is there's 8 or 9 guys with 4 or 5 big trucks parked around doing one man's job. I mean, it's just an incredible waste of money by the department. So you turn around and ask the taxpayers to raise their taxes to pay for all that waste. That's a pretty tough deal to try to justify. So my question is, in your audit, did your audit suggest that maybe the department tries to cut out on some of its own waste before they start trying to dig the taxpayer for more money?
Okay, so thank you. An email question from Jack in Hayden Lake along that same lines, that the DOT has to get its house in order, quote unquote, before the legislature would feel comfortable increasing funding.
Oh, and I'd very much like to tackle that. First off, I'd like to point out that we do have an efficiency report that is posted out on our website, and it talks about a number of the things that we're working on to improve the efficiency and stretch the taxpayer dollars in with the Transportation Department just as far as we possibly can. And one of the ways that we're doing that, I would like to briefly hit on our practical design program, where we were looking at how can we take the bells and whistles off of projects and just build just exactly what was needed to meet the project's needs. We estimated a year ago that we would save $50 million over our 5-year program. $5.6 million is what we thought we'd save this first year. Well, instead, we didn't save $5.6 million, we saved $27 million. That has translated into 300 more lane miles of projects around the state that would not have gotten done. Pavement jobs, seal coats that would not have gotten done without this practical design program. That's covered in this report, as is a number of other things. And you know, I would like to talk about when people drive by and they see a group of people, it's impossible for me to know exactly what the gentleman saw at any one time, but I will tell you, as a former district engineer, I oversaw work going on throughout southwest Idaho, and I had a number of crews, and I frequently hired and we retained correctional industry crews to go out and do a lot of work for us. Well, you've got a lot of inmates, they need people standing, and you can't tell necessarily whether they're guards. They goes, well, you got a lot of people standing around watching a couple people working. Well, that's it's not always the way it looks, so don't always assume that it is ITD staff.
But that is a problem for the people that call us as legislators, and that puts us in a position of asking the department, what are you doing with the money, and why are people complaining? They want their potholes fixed. That's what they tell us. They want they don't want to build a new big structure. They want us to put the money on the road, fix the potholes, fix the cracks in the road, fix the bridges that are not as solid as they ought to be, and that puts us in the position of saying, well, we need to work with the department. We need to be responsible to our constituents at home wanting those things, and so we asked. That's why we asked for the audit, and the audit said there were 52 things that they thought the department could do better. Now the department has picked that up, and some of them, they had already begun some of them, but they have picked up on quite a few of those things that have been recommended, and it will take a few years for them to be able to assimilate all of that information and begin to do some of the things that will, as she's talked about, practical design. It'll take a little while for them to get geared up and take advantage of what we were told in the audit.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And that audit has actually been very useful to us, and we are absolutely committed to implementing those findings just as quickly as we possibly can while doing it right. Yeah.
I just want to remind the folks who are on the phone, we'll catch your calls in our broadcast after the show, part of our web extra. So if you're on the phones, go ahead and stay on the phones. But first, let me get to Susan in Hayden. Susan.
Yes, I have a comment. I believe that residents or developers of new subdivisions ought to pay a higher percentage of funding for roadways than those who've been paying over the years. I'd like your response to that. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, as a legislator, I agree with that. I see some of the other things that bother me a bit is that when we have a development or even a new school or that type of thing, very often they don't ask the Department of Transportation before they begin that project. But after they've completed the project, they come to the Department of Transportation and say, oh, by the way.
Well, and sometimes these are under local jurisdictions.
That's true.
Not
That's
the state
true.
jurisdiction.
But still, the Department of Transportation, they want them to fix a state road. They wanted access into their new building, their new mall, their new school, or whatever. Right. And that's not in the budget for this year. I mean, they've already got their budget to work on, and so we've been trying to encourage that before you do a development, before you build a new school, before you do those things, you really ought to look at your transportation plan, how you're going to get buses in and out, cars in and out. Are you going to need some work done on the road? And go to the Department of Transportation and work with them before you begin those things.
We're rapidly running out of time. I want to get one quick question thought. If we're all going to work toward more fuel-efficient cars, maybe electric cars, getting away from gas, which means we have less resources going into that fund that pays, which is good. Not using as much gas is good for the environment, bad for the roads. What are the options, real quick?
Sales tax.
Sales tax?
You know, short term, I believe it's a fuel tax. It still is. We got a short-term crisis. I agree, it's a short-term solution. Now, longer term, you got probably 6 states out there nationwide, and I think I was just reading about California too, looking at a vehicle mile travel tax. But that's probably a good 10 years away from having the technology and the policies in place to actually implement that.
And part of that addresses different motorists across all groups. So if we went back to a weight distance tax as we did previously for trucks, and you did something similar for cars, so that the amount of space they take, regardless of what fuel they do or do not use, and then make it mileage based, you've got essentially the same funding structure registration-wise for every motorist group. We'd find that very useful, and it would get us off this multi-colored patchwork of registration fees that we've got in the state.
So we have to go back. Go back to the trucker debate.
We would very much object to that.
Right.
Those of us who live in rural Idaho, and have very little choice, and you know that where I come from, how far that is that we have to travel.
And we're rapidly running out of time. I do apologize. Well, stay on the line. We'll go for Web Extra. I'd like to thank our guests, Representative Joanne Wood, Pamela Lowe, and Dave Carlson. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And if you want to find out more about the legislature, go to Idaho. Be sure to watch Idaho Reports and check on our website. Thanks for joining us. Good night.
Presentation of dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho. To order a copy of this program from Idaho Public Television, call our toll-free number or visit us on the World Wide Web